Best way to describe Dave Wakeland is that he is the millennial Jim Rockford from the Rockford Files. He's the modern day private eye hero, the person you want in your corner when there's trouble. Someone who's tough, loyal, handy with their fists, and always on the side of the underdog. Dave is one half of Wakeland and Chen, which is Vancouver's top security firm. And he's a capable and experienced detective who's seen just about everything. Dave is the main character in 3 novels so far. Invisible Dead and Cut You Down are the first 2. And he's also the main character in about a dozen short stories that I've written. But what happens in Hell and Gone focuses on an event that shakes Wakeland to his core. Hell and Gone is about an act of public violence which breaks out on the street in the early morning in Chinatown. And Dave Wakeland witnesses this act from his office, gets a look at the shooters as they drive off, and then leaps into action as any good private detective character should, literally jumping down from the fire escape to perform first aid and save the life of one of the wounded people. So he starts the book as a hero. As the authorities arrive on the scene, he enters the building to see if there are any other survivors going in where the shooters came from, and he sees something which is so beyond his experience that when the police ask him what he witnesses, Wakeland just says, "I didn't see anything." Very soon after that, Wakeland is caught between a ruthless police chief and a pair of gang leaders, all of whom want the shooters found, no matter the cost in human life. And with Dave Wakeland and his friends right in the center of this. So the only way for Wakeland to come to grips with this is to find the shooters before they find him. Jeff Chen is Dave's business partner. He's a family man, a businessman, and he's basically everything that Dave is not. Their differences are what make their partnership all the stronger. You know, if Dave was the Steve Wozniak, sort of the visionary, the person who's willing to stay up all night working on a case, Jeff would be the Steve Jobs, the person who is adept at business relationships, who has an overall vision for the company and how to present himself. And so their partnership is between somebody who values detective work and someone who values the security business. But those connections that Jeff has prove essential when Dave is suddenly forced to find who's responsible for this shooting. But Jeff also has a secret. The financing for Wakeland and Chen originally came from a community leader and suspected gangster who was a friend of Jeff's named Uncle Roy Long. When Wakeland finds this out, it will stress their partnership, perhaps to its breaking point. The Wakeland series looks at Vancouver from the ground up. It's a diverse place, it's a vibrant place, but it's very rife with class antagonisms, systemic racism, all sorts of structural issues that the city has. And the characters in the book are formed by the city's history. So Dave Wakeland learned to fight at the Astoria Boxing Club, this very famous gym, while Jeff, who was originally a satellite kid, he forged his first community ties at the benevolent associations in Chinatown. So they're characters that are very embedded in Vancouver. As a city, Vancouver is a far more troublesome place than the postcards would lead you to believe. Harm reduction, gentrification, gang warfare, the opioid crisis, systemic racism, these are all at the forefront of Hell and Gone. In fact, in one point in the book, Wakeland says, this is where the West ends. Hell and Gone started as a story that was published in the back pages of Image Comics' series The Violent by Ed Brisson and Adam Gorham. In this original story, a homeless man is knocked aside during a violent robbery, and what seems at first like cruelty is in fact an act of kindness. It's the robber actually pushing him out of the way of the violence to come. So in researching Hell and Gone, I spoke to police officers, former armed robbers. I read a ton of books about international organized crime. But more than that, I just try to pay attention to the city and how it changes. what's going on in Vancouver, what its pressure points are, and then the gaps where things maybe go unreported. Hell and Gone is basically a book about institutional lies. Whether you're a cop, a criminal, or one half of a private investigation firm, sooner or later you have to reckon with the unpleasant realities you've ignored. Well, the Wakeland series is basically about two things. First of all, it's about representing Vancouver, how I see Vancouver in all its complexity and problems. And then secondly, it's about taking the classic detective novel, the classic private eye story, into the modern era. Whether it's Raymond Chandler or Sue Grafton, Walter Mosley, Robert B. Parker, Lawrence Block, those types of detective stories speak to me about, the issues that are important to me. Work, justice, and holding on to one's ethics in a very fraught world. The first two novels, Invisible Dead and Cut You Down, were nominated for several awards, including the Seamus, the Hammett Prize, the City of Vancouver Book Award, and one of the short stories featuring Wakeland, Wonderful Life, was nominated for a Crime Writers of Canada award for Best Short Story. Hell and Gone marks a new chapter for Wakeland. I think this is both the most perilous case that he's ever faced, and it's also a perfect place for readers to start, in that this is almost ground zero of where everything starts to get to him. It really deals with violence and trauma and how one reacts to that. I think Hell and Gone is the best of the series. I am obviously horribly biased on this, but I think this is the book that gets closest to how I see Vancouver and how I see the detective novel. Well, the title, Hell and Gone is an expression, right? Somebody's been through Hell and Gone, or something's been blown to Hell and Gone. But I think the title just fits with what Wakeland goes through in the novel, right? This book really puts him through the ringer, and it shows Vancouver being put through the ringer. And I think that this is the perfect term for the last year or so. Even though this book was written pre-pandemic, the pandemic has really brought out a lot of the fracture points which the book focuses on. Anti-Asian racism, I think, has never been more virulent than now in Vancouver. I also think that we've had a gang war for the last year with several murders, which plays into this. And then also just the growing sense of alienation between working class and lower middle class people and the elite in Vancouver. This is definitely a story that pits Wakeland against a couple of those movers and shakers. Whether they be gangsters, whether they be businessmen with organized crime ties, or whether they be police administrators who are maybe bending or shaping the rules in their own way. I think that this book puts Wakeland in conflict with a lot of the things that people who live in Vancouver are starting to realize are really, really endemic problems. A great benefit of being a writer is you don't really need any specific gear. You can write anywhere and with anything. I used to steal pens to write on. I'm not proud of that, but you don't really need a bunch of fancy stuff. Now I have much better equipment, but the important thing is to just develop the habit of writing every day. And if you miss a day, do not beat yourself up about it, but you just want to get in the habit, especially if you're writing a novel, just because they take so long and there's so much work to do on one. You really want to establish a certain time and try to stick with that. And, I don't always hit that, but I at least try to. And as far as writing programs, I was writing in Microsoft Word. I write by hand, everything. But then I type it into Microsoft Word. Now I'm using Pages because I just refuse to buy a subscription to Microsoft Word. That seems needlessly expensive. And I do have Scrivener, which I think is just a great program for collecting research and alternate drafts, and when you're working on a series character, you kind of need somewhere to put all the junk that's left over, research notes, things like that. So, but mostly Pages, Word, and Scrivener are what I use. The writing itself hasn't changed a whole lot due to the pandemic. The business itself has changed a lot, and I still don't know how what the ramifications of that are going to be. Writing novels it's a long-term endeavor. So I think, it's really important to sort of build that habit of, it's 5 o'clock, time to get some work done. And I do look at writing as work. It deserves to be done with some reverence and some nod to the fact that it's an art and a craft, but it's also something that you have to, put the work in, and not just one day, but regularly. So that's how I try to approach it. No spoilers. If he survives, then a fourth book will take him to a real existential crisis. So that's what I'd like to do next. Helen Gone is definitely, I really think it's the best thing that I've done. And I'm really excited to see the feedback on that and see how people respond to it and this chapter of Wakeland's journey. So, thank you.
Mm-hmm.